This story isn't something I plan to tell anyone. It's twisted, messy, and, honestly, makes me question what kind of fool I've been these past months. But I can't stop replaying it, and the only way I might get it out of my head is by sharing it. So here it is. Last week, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was 3 in the morning, and I was half asleep, but I saw that it was from some random guy on Facebook. Weird. I almost ignored it, but something told me to open it. What I read shook me awake in seconds. This guy, Travis, had sent a message with a few screenshots attached. In the text he said, "Hey man, I don't know if you're aware, but Jessica's been seeing other people. I thought you should know, and I think you deserve to see this." I felt this weird, ice-cold feeling spread through my chest. Travis wasn't just some stranger. He was on Jessica's friend list. We'd met him once at a mutual friend's wedding, and he seemed decent enough, which only made this weirder. I tapped on the first screenshot. There it was, Jessica's text to him, and they weren't just friendly. They were intense. She was saying things to him I hadn't heard in years, calling him pet names she used to call me. And then she was telling him how she'd never felt this way before, which was a punch in the gut considering she used to say that exact line to me. But that was just the start. The other screenshots, they weren't just between her and Travis. There was an entire thread, each guy in it trying to be more charming than the last, and Jessica, my Jessica, practically giggling along with them in every text. There were at least 5 different guys. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience just reading it. Each message was a knife twisting in my stomach, especially when I saw her sending these same photos. One she'd sent me during our early days of dating. Playing coy, sending flirtatious replies, acting like she was some single girl just out for fun. Before I knew what I was doing, I dialed her number. She was supposedly out with a friend for a late-night coffee run. She didn't answer. I tried again and again until my calls went straight to voicemail. I don't know what possessed me, but I drove to the cafe she said she'd be at.
No, Jessica.
No friend. I waited in the car, watching the clock tick for half an hour, then an hour. My hands were shaking, my mind racing through every possibility of what might be happening. The drive home felt like a fever dream. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, adrenaline and disbelief battling it out in my veins. When I got back, I just sat in the car, staring at our house. It looked so normal. The place where we'd built a life together, where we'd promised each other forever. Now every inch of it felt like a lie. I was still in the car when her headlights appeared in the driveway. She must have spotted me because, as soon as she got out, I saw that familiar look on her face, the one she wears when she's preparing to explain away something she knows is going to hit me wrong. I'd seen it before over little things, but this time it made my blood boil. I waited, watching as she walked up to the driver's side. Her face was a mask of calm, maybe with a little bit of irritation thrown in, like I was the one inconveniencing her. She tapped on the window. I rolled it down just a crack. Her voice came through, soft but annoyed, like she was dealing with a child. "Why are you sitting in the car at 2 in the morning, Mark? What's wrong with you?" I opened the door, got out, and walked past her into the house. She followed me in, a little laugh slipping out, like she thought this was all some misunderstanding that she could joke her way out of. I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and opened the messages from Travis, scrolling through the screenshots until I found the one that had hit me the hardest. Her laughing with another guy, sending him a selfie with that sly, coy smile I hadn't seen in a long time, telling him she couldn't wait to see him again. When I handed her the phone, she actually laughed, shaking her head like it was some ridiculous joke. She barely even looked at the screen. "What? Who's this from? You don't believe this garbage, right?" Her voice was so casual, like we were discussing a mix-up at the grocery store, not some twisted betrayal. But I just stared at her, and slowly, the smile faded. She clicked through the screenshots one by one, the color draining from her face. I thought for a second that maybe I'd see some real remorse. Instead, she looked back up at me and said, "This is Travis you're getting mad about? You know he's a liar, right? He's obsessed with me. He's just trying to make you jealous." Couldn't believe it. She wasn't denying the messages. She was laughing them off, like they were a minor inconvenience to her life. I clenched my fists to keep myself from smashing something. "It's not just him, Jess. There are 4 other guys here. 4. My voice was shaking, but I kept my eyes locked on her face, refusing to give her any chance to escape. Then she hit me with this line, and it felt like she'd punched me in the gut. I didn't think you'd be so dramatic, Mark. You're really going to believe a bunch of screenshots? Guys just like to talk, you know that. You're acting paranoid. She said it with this look, like I was some sort of pathetic, insecure loser who couldn't handle a little fun. I stood there, staring at her, trying to comprehend that this was the same woman I'd been with for years. So what is it then, Jess? You're saying this is all fake? That Travis just conjured up these messages from thin air. She rolled her eyes, tossed my phone onto the counter, and shrugged. Believe what you want, Mark. I can't help it if other guys want my attention. That's just what happens when you look like I do. Then, with that self-satisfied smirk, she turned her back and started walking toward the stairs, as if this entire conversation was beneath her. Something snapped in me then. All those years of trust, of faith in her, evaporated. I'd been trying so hard to catch even a trace of remorse, of decency. But this woman wasn't apologizing. She was proud that I took a deep breath, trying to get a handle on the rage building up inside me. It was like a fire was burning through every memory we'd shared, and each second I looked at her face just added more fuel. This woman, the one who'd stood beside me in front of our families, made promises, shared a life, was now treating me like I was the unreasonable one. She was halfway up the stairs when I finally spoke, my voice low and dead calm. Jess, stop. She paused, but didn't turn around. It was as if she was deciding whether it was even worth her time to keep talking to me. I went on. You're really going to walk away after this? After I just showed you evidence of you messing around with 5 other men? She still didn't turn. My voice grew louder, my control slipping. Look at me, Jessica. Don't you even feel an ounce of shame? Slowly, she turned her head, barely looking over her shoulder. Her expression was so indifferent, so infuriatingly calm, that it hit me harder than any argument we'd ever had. Her voice was flat as she replied, Mark, I'm done explaining myself. I don't know what's gotten into you, but I don't owe you some huge explanation every time you get insecure. I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound that echoed through the house. Insecure? This isn't about insecurity, Jess. It's about you betraying me. And don't you dare pretend this is some minor misunderstanding. I pulled my phone out again, flipping through more of the screenshots, feeling like I had to make her see, had to make her feel something. This isn't just Travis. This is Paul, Jared, Mitch. Are you really going to stand there and act like they're all making this up? Finally, something cracked. She snapped, turning fully to face me with a look of pure exasperation. Fine, Mark. You really want the truth. Her voice was laced with mockery, her eyes cold and sharp. Yes, I've been seeing other guys. A few of them, actually. But maybe if you'd been half as fun or interesting as they were, I wouldn't have needed to. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. My mind went blank. I couldn't even speak, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at her, as the reality of it settled over me like a weight crushing my chest. She didn't just admit it. She was taunting me with it. She took a few steps back down, closing the distance between us, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You want to know what else, Mark? Each one of those guys you're so worried about, they actually know how to make me feel special. They don't sit around like you do, moping, wondering where I am every minute. They know how to live. She leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. Maybe if you tried to keep up, you wouldn't have to feel so sorry for yourself right now. In that moment, something inside me broke. I realized she'd been lying to my face, again and again, with no remorse. The woman I thought I knew was long gone, replaced by this version of Jess who didn't care if she was tearing me apart. Without a word, I turned and headed toward the door. As I reached for my jacket, she let out a laugh, one that sent a chill through me. Where are you going, Mark? Running off so you don't have to face reality. I paused, looking back at her. My voice came out cold and steady, steadier than I'd felt in days. I'm done here, Jess, and I'm done with you. Then, I left, slamming the door behind me, the sound echoing through the empty night. As I walked out into the darkness, for the first time in a long time, I felt something clear and certain. This was over. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, gripping the wheel so hard I thought it might crack. My mind kept circling back to her words, each one sharper and colder than the last. It was like she'd been waiting for that moment, ready to spit out all her bitterness and disdain for me the second she got the chance. And that smug, unbothered expression, that smirk that said I was just a passing inconvenience in her life. When I finally pulled over, I was in some empty parking lot on the edge of town. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, and I glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. "Hey man, it's Travis. I didn't mean to mess things up between you and Jess. I just thought you had a right to know." My stomach twisted. Travis, the guy who'd put all of this in motion. I hadn't even asked him for more details before storming off, but now I needed answers. I dialed the number, and he picked up on the first ring, his voice cautious but curious. "Mark? Look, man, I didn't know if you'd call, but tell me everything." I interrupted, my voice barely under control. "I want to know exactly what's been going on. No excuses, no holding back." He hesitated, and then he sighed. "All right, I'll tell you what I know." He cleared his throat, sounding more nervous than I'd expected. "I met Jess a few months ago through some mutual friends. She told me she was technically married, but acted like you guys were on the brink of splitting up. Said you were always distant, never there for her, that she felt trapped at home." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been there for her every single day, supporting her, doing my best to make things work. And she'd told him that? The level of betrayal was almost too much to process. Travis went on. She'd flirt, kind of in that, "I'm bored, make me feel alive" way. I thought she was just blowing off steam. Then, a few weeks later, she suggested we go out for drinks alone. One thing led to another and he trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. I got the picture. "Was it just you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though every word felt like gravel grinding in my throat. "No," he admitted quietly. I started to realize she was seeing other guys too, not just me. There was a lot she wouldn't say, but I picked up on it. I stopped talking to her after that. I'm not proud of it, man, but I didn't know what she was telling you, and I didn't want to be part of it anymore. My head was spinning. Travis was just one in a series of guys she'd been using, stringing along, and lying to about me. I asked, "Why did you tell me now?" "I felt guilty," he said. "When I heard her talk about you, it just didn't feel right. You deserve to know what was going on, even if I'm part of the mess." He paused. "Look, I don't know what else I can say, but if you need anything else, I'm here to help. I get if you don't want to hear from me after this, though." I hung up without another word. His guilt was a hollow thing to me. It didn't fix anything, and it didn't erase the fact that he'd willingly crossed that line with Jess, even knowing she was married. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, leaned back, and closed my eyes. A list. The thought popped into my mind, half-formed, jagged. I needed a list of everyone she'd been with. Each name was like a piece of the puzzle that made up this twisted version of Jess that I'd never known. But this wasn't just about understanding anymore. I had to face it piece by piece, confront the lies, the deceit, all the people she'd pulled into this sick web. It was time to dig deeper than I'd ever planned. And as angry as I was, I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. When I got back home, the house was dark and silent. I half expected Jess to be asleep, comfortably pretending none of this had happened. But as I stepped inside, I saw her waiting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a blank expression. She looked up, not with concern or regret, but with this bored, impatient look, like I was taking up her precious time. "Back already?" she sneered, not even bothering to hide her irritation. I ignored her tone. I was done playing nice, done letting her dismiss this as if it was just a hiccup in our lives. I walked over to the coffee table, tossed my phone onto it, and leaned down until I was right in her face. "We're not finished. I want the names, Jess. Every single one." She smirked, barely flinching. "Why? So you can play detective? Or maybe you want to go crying to them like you did with Travis?" She tilted her head, eyes flashing with something between amusement and disdain. "Don't turn this around on me," I said, voice sharp. "This is on you, and you know it. So tell me, Jess, how many? Or are there too many to remember?" She just laughed, a short, mocking sound that cut through the silence. You really think you're going to intimidate me, Mark? You want a number? Fine. 7. Maybe 8. And guess what? Each one of them knew exactly what they were getting into. Her words hit me like a slap. She said it so casually, like she was rattling off items on a grocery list. 7. 8. My mind was reeling. I'd been prepared for the idea of 1 or 2, maybe 3 at most. But this was a whole other level of betrayal. Unbelievable, I muttered, feeling a bitterness seep into every word. You've been throwing yourself around with strangers, acting like some teenager desperate for attention. And you think I'm the pathetic one? She shrugged, smirking with that maddening calm. You really don't get it, do you? I don't need to justify myself to you. You're the one who's been boring, predictable, stuck in your routine. You wouldn't know excitement if it slapped you in the face. She leaned back on the couch, crossing her legs, as if she was on some kind of throne. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay steady, but I could feel the rage bubbling up. Is that why you lied about it all? You were too bored to stay faithful, so you decided to turn our marriage into a joke. She rolled her eyes. What marriage, Mark? The one where you sit around all day thinking everything's fine while I'm out actually living? Don't kid yourself. You were always just convenient. I stared at her, stunned into silence by the callousness of her words. It was like every single thing I thought I knew about her had been twisted into some kind of nightmare. And as much as I wanted to shout, to get some kind of reaction out of her that wasn't this cold indifference, I knew I had to keep my anger in check. She was trying to provoke me, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. So you used me, I said, my voice low but controlled. While I was here building a life with you, you were treating it like a game. Well, here's the thing, Jess. I paused, my voice dropping even lower. Games have consequences. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the only crack in her armor. Oh? And what exactly are you going to do, Mark? I let a slow, bitter smile spread across my face. You'll see. Without another word, I turned and headed upstairs. I stormed up the stairs, my mind racing with 100 plans at once. Every step felt like fuel, stoking a fire that had been building since the moment I found those texts. Jess had done everything in her power to tear apart our life and dismiss it as if it was nothing. But I wasn't going to just let her walk away unscathed. Not after what she'd said. Not after the way she smirked while shredding every bit of trust we'd built. Once I reached our bedroom, I shut the door behind me, locking myself into silence for a moment. I needed to think. I knew Jess. Knew she would be banking on the idea that I'd either rage out or that I'd crumple and accept whatever story she fed me. But if she wanted to play games, I'd show her a move she wouldn't expect. I went to our closet and pulled down the box where we kept all our paperwork. Legal documents, bills, things I'd barely thought about before but now felt like ammunition. Jess's finances were in there, buried under piles of paperwork. I knew enough to understand that she'd been relying on my income to keep herself afloat. Her job barely covered her own expenses, and I'd been the one picking up the slack for years. Every month, I transferred extra funds to her account without a second thought. But now I wasn't just thinking. I was planning. I went to my phone and found her list of contacts. Scrolling through, I recognized one of the numbers she'd texted most recently. It was a name I hadn't seen before, Jared. I remembered it from the messages Travis had sent. I took a screenshot of her call log, then did the same with a few other names she'd been in frequent contact with. One by one, I started compiling everything, each name, each text, each message that painted a picture of the life Jess had been leading behind my back. And then I had a new idea. I couldn't just let these guys off the hook either. They'd known she was married, or at least that she was taken, yet they'd still played along. I opened a blank message and started typing a group text. I was about to send them all the same message that I'd already practiced in my mind. Congratulations, guys. You're all winners in this little game Jessica's been playing. Each of you got a taste of her freedom, but you also got something else. I hope she was worth it, because now you're all dealing with the aftermath. I hesitated for a second, fingers hovering over the send button, before hitting send. One by one, they all got my message, my personal congratulations, along with a warning that would keep them up at night. I barely had time to think when my phone started buzzing with replies. First, it was Travis, typing back in a panic. Wait, what do you mean? What aftermath? Then came Paul with a series of question marks. One by one, I watched as each man tried to figure out what was happening. They all seemed stunned, blindsided by the same reality that had slapped me in the face earlier that night. Each of them scrambling for information, desperate to untangle themselves from the mess they'd willingly jumped into. I didn't bother replying to any of them. Let them sit with it. Let them feel the sting of betrayal and confusion. I waited, watching the frantic replies roll in, each one more desperate than the last. The satisfaction was brief. Sure, they were panicking now, but it didn't erase what Jess had done. The betrayal still throbbed under my skin, raw and relentless. These guys were scrambling, maybe feeling a fraction of what I felt, but it wasn't enough. The only person I really wanted to confront, the person who'd orchestrated this entire disaster, was Jess. I went downstairs. She was still on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't just detonated a bomb on our life. I walked over, standing in front of her until she finally looked up, annoyed. What? She said, her voice dripping with impatience. Did you come down here for another little speech? She smirked, setting her phone down as if she was waiting for the next round of my supposed meltdown. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. I hope you're ready for what comes next, Jess. You thought this was a game, treating me like some naive fool, playing me against God knows how many other men. But guess what? It's your turn now. She laughed, crossing her arms with a look of mock curiosity. Oh, really? And what exactly are you going to do, Mark? You're not the type to get your hands dirty. See, that's where you're wrong, I replied, letting a cold smile settle on my face. Because I've already started. I just sent a little message to each of your friends. Travis, Jared, all of them. They're panicking now, trying to figure out what kind of mess they've gotten themselves into. Did you think you'd just move on and leave a trail of chaos with no fallout? Not anymore. For the first time that night, I saw her mask slip. Her smirk faltered, and something like worry flickered in her eyes. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice was just a little too forced. You're bluffing. They don't care. They're not going to freak out over some message from a guy they don't even know. Oh, they care, I replied coolly. And they're going to start questioning things, Jess. They're going to wonder who else you've been lying to, and maybe, just maybe, they're going to realize they've been played just like I have. I leaned in, letting the bitterness seep into my words. And guess what? Unlike me, they won't stick around when they figure out who you really are. She swallowed, and for the first time her confidence cracked, a tiny fracture that I clung to. She tried to regain her footing, scoffing and rolling her eyes, but I could see the fear beneath it. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. And now she knew it. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I straightened up, grabbed my keys off the counter, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? She demanded, her voice shaking slightly. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and turned to look at her one last time. I'm leaving, Jess. And unlike you, I mean it. I opened the door and walked out, feeling a strange, unfamiliar sense of relief mixing with the hurt and anger. As the door clicked shut behind me, I knew there was no going back. Walking away from the house felt surreal. The anger was still there, smoldering under my skin, but as I got into the car, a different feeling crept in. A sense of freedom, a glimpse of the life waiting on the other side of all this wreckage. I started driving without a destination, just letting the quiet of the night seep into my thoughts. I felt like I was peeling away a layer of myself, letting go of the weight of years of deception, lies, and manipulation. But somehow I wasn't done yet. I pulled over to the side of the road and scrolled through my phone, feeling the need for one last move before I could let this go completely. I opened Facebook and typed out a post, letting each word fall as deliberately as a final nail in a coffin. To everyone who's ever known me and Jess, here's the truth. She spent the past few months or longer playing a little game behind my back, with a list of guys she's been with, each one thinking he was the only one. Maybe they thought they were special, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, the truth is out. Jess, enjoy the freedom you clearly wanted. I'm done. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the post button. I knew what this would do, how it would ripple out, turning her perfect little image into shattered glass. Part of me wondered if it was too harsh, But then I thought back to her smug look, her complete lack of remorse, the way she laughed in my face about the whole thing. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. I hit post. The notifications started piling up within minutes. Comments, messages, people reaching out in shock or sympathy. I scrolled through them with a sense of detachment, reading the reactions. Friends, family members, even people we hadn't talked to in years were all chiming in. The truth had detonated like a bomb, exactly as I knew it would. Jess's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, piece by piece, in front of everyone. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from Jess. "Take it down. Now. I swear, if you don't." I let out a low laugh, something bitter and exhausted. Her threats were empty now. She had no more leverage, nothing left to hold over me. I was out, and she had no control over me anymore. Another message appeared, her words spiraling from threats to pleading. "Mark, come on. This isn't fair. We can work this out. Just take the post down and we can talk. You're being petty." I could practically hear her voice, dripping with that same fake sweetness she'd used to manipulate me for so long. I left her on read. She'd painted me as some naive, desperate husband for too long, taking me for granted, mocking me while she built her little world of lies. Now she could sit in the mess she'd made. After a while, I turned off my phone and sat back, looking up at the sky. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a kind of peace settle over me. The next morning, I woke up to find my phone overflowing with messages and missed calls. Apparently, my post had made the rounds. Friends who hadn't spoken to me in years were suddenly eager to chime in. Some were shocked, some offered support, and a few were just there for the drama. I ignored most of them, but one message caught my attention. A message from Jess's mother, Linda. "Mark, please call me when you get this. I'm so sorry for what you're going through. I had no idea it was this bad." Linda and I had always been close, closer than most people are with their in-laws. Over the years, she'd become like a second mother to me, and I knew she genuinely cared about our relationship. I hesitated, unsure of whether I even wanted to hear what she had to say. But a part of me knew I owed her an explanation, or at least a conversation. I dialed her number, and she picked up almost immediately. "Mark, honey, I don't know what to say," she started, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw your post last night, and I can't believe it. I'm so sorry. If I'd known she was doing this, I would have tried to talk some sense into her." Hearing the pain in her voice hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I could feel my own anger softening, just a little. "Linda, you're not responsible for any of this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jess made her own choices. I needed people to know the truth. After everything she put me through." She sighed heavily. "I understand. I really do. I wish she'd talk to me instead of doing all of this. I didn't raise her to treat people this way. I don't know what's gotten into her." She sounded lost, like she was trying to piece together the daughter she thought she knew with the person Jess had become. There was a pause, and then Linda spoke again, her tone serious. "I don't blame you for exposing her. Honestly, maybe she needed to be shaken awake. She's always been impulsive, but this is a new level." She took a shaky breath, as if trying to find the right words. "Mark, whatever you decide to do, I want you to know that we're here for you. You've been like family to us, and nothing she's done will change that." Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. For a moment, I had to swallow back the wave of emotions threatening to surface. Jess may have shattered our marriage, but her family had become a huge part of my life. Losing them would be like losing another piece of myself. "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot," I managed to say, my voice thick. "I don't know what's next, but I think I need some time to figure things out." "I understand," she said softly. "Just know that whatever you need, we're here." After we hung up, I sat for a while, letting the conversation sink in. It was a strange feeling, realizing that even after everything, I still had people in my corner. That whole day, I tried to clear my mind, hoping to start fresh. But I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just about Jess anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I felt the weight of all those years, of everything I'd given, all the love and trust I'd poured into this relationship, only to see her treat it like it was worthless. My post had sparked a wildfire, And while part of me wanted to leave it alone and move forward, another part needed real closure. A final act that would put this behind me for good. Late that evening, my phone lit up with a call. It was Jess. I hesitated, knowing exactly how this conversation would go. But something in me wanted to hear it, to see if she'd finally show any shred of honesty or remorse. I picked up, and immediately her voice, sharp and impatient, flooded the line. "Mark, I can't believe you'd do this to me," she hissed, skipping any pretense of niceties. "Do you know how many people have called me? People are laughing at me, Mark. You made me look like a complete joke." I felt a cold satisfaction hearing the panic in her voice. But I stayed calm, refusing to let her twist this around. "Jess, I didn't make you look like anything," I replied, my voice steady. "You made yourself look like a joke. You played all of us, over and over, and you thought there'd be no consequences." She let out an exasperated sigh, then switched gears, her voice softer but dripping with manipulation. "Mark, don't you think you went a little too far? I mean, maybe I wasn't perfect, but do we really need to air our private lives like this? Can't we just talk about this without you making it public?" I couldn't help but laugh, the sound harsh and bitter. "Now you care about privacy? Where was that concern when you were sneaking around with half a dozen other guys? You didn't think about us then. So why should I keep any of this quiet for you?" She was silent for a long moment. I could practically feel her trying to find the right words to reel me back in. Finally, she said, "Mark, we had good times, didn't we? I know I messed up, but we can still fix this, right? I was just, I don't know, caught up in something. But it doesn't have to end this way." The audacity of it almost made me lose my composure. She was reaching, desperately trying to pull at the strings of our past to find a way back in. Like it was just that easy to undo everything. "Jess, stop. We're done. I don't know how you convinced yourself you could play with people's lives like this, but I'm not sticking around to be part of it. You want excitement, freedom? Fine. You can have it. All of it. I'm out." For a moment there was silence. Then her voice changed again, laced with frustration, almost venomous. "Fine, Mark. If that's what you want, then leave. Just don't act like you're some kind of saint here. Maybe you were never enough for me in the first place." The words stung, but not in the way she intended. They stung because they showed exactly who she'd become. A woman who'd rather burn everything down than admit she was wrong. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice level. "Maybe you're right, Jess. Maybe I wasn't enough for you. But I'll be enough for myself, and that's all I need." Without waiting for her response, I hung up. The click of the call ending felt like the last chapter closing. I set my phone down and let out a long breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. There was no more waiting for apologies, no more hoping she'd see the damage she'd caused. I'd given her every chance, every benefit of the doubt, and she'd shown me exactly who she was each time. Now, finally, I was free from the weight of her lies. In the days that followed, I took deliberate steps to reclaim my life. I started sorting out the logistics of our split, contacting a lawyer to start the paperwork for divorce. Each document, each signature was like a small piece of closure, a final sweep of the ashes left behind. I didn't know what the future looked like now, but I knew it wouldn't involve constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. Surprisingly, Linda, Jess's mother, kept reaching out. She'd text every few days, not with questions or attempts to pull me back, but just with genuine support. Her messages were simple, words of encouragement and little check-ins to see how I was doing. It was strange, but comforting. Linda had been a part of my life for years, and knowing that she still stood by me felt like I hadn't lost everything. And through her, I knew that I'd always have people who'd seen the real me, even if Jess hadn't. One evening, as I was packing up a few of my things, I found an old photo of Jess and me. One from the early days when things had been good, when she'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a twinge of something bittersweet, a strange mourning for what I thought we had. But then I put it away, realizing that person was gone, if she'd ever existed at all. Weeks passed, and with each one, I found myself feeling stronger, lighter. I stopped checking my phone, stopped wondering what Jess was doing, or if she tried to reach out. It was over, and that was a kind of freedom I hadn't anticipated. I started to focus on myself for the first time in years, rediscovering things I'd loved, reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from. Life was moving forward, and for the first time I felt ready to move with it. Looking back, I saw the whole ordeal as a brutal lesson. I'd learned that loyalty without boundaries only invited people to take advantage of it, that loving someone didn't mean letting them tear you down. I'd learned that my own worth wasn't tied to what anyone else thought, but to what I knew I deserved. And above all, I learned that sometimes the greatest act of strength was simply to walk away. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone who's ever been in my shoes, it would be this: trust your gut, respect yourself, and don't let anyone make you feel like you're too little. You don't have to prove your worth to someone who's too blind to see it. I always knew Ashley had a dramatic streak, but I didn't realize it would spill over into my life like a scene out of some trashy daytime soap. It started with a single red stain. It was late October, one of those crisp evenings when the chill feels good in your lungs. I came home from a late meeting, and the house was eerily quiet. Usually, the TV would be blaring one of her true crime shows, or I'd hear her humming off-key in the kitchen while pretending to cook. But that night, nothing. Just darkness and the faint smell of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. Then I saw it. A single red wine stain on the beige carpet by the couch. Normally, this wouldn't have been a big deal. Ashley wasn't exactly the type to baby her wine glasses. But this was odd. There was no glass, no bottle, no attempt to clean it. Just that dark, ominous blotch bleeding into the carpet fibers. I called out her name. No answer. Checked the kitchen, empty. The bedroom, bed still made. I was about to text her when I noticed her phone on the table. Ashley never left her phone behind. She clung to that thing like it was her lifeline. Something wasn't right. I sat down on the couch, staring at that red stain like it had the answers. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Maybe she had gone out with friends and forgotten to text me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. And then I heard it. The soft ping of a notification from her phone. I didn't want to look. I'd never been the kind of guy who snoops. But something in my gut screamed at me to pick it up. My hands shook as I unlocked it. She'd used the same password since college. And there it was, a message preview from someone saved in her contacts as Bossman. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again? The words felt like a punch to the chest. My ears started ringing, and for a second, I couldn't even breathe. I opened the message thread and saw a series of photos. Ashley and Chris, her boss, in a dimly lit hotel room. Her smile was radiant, but not the kind I'd seen in years. I don't remember much of what happened after that. Rage and disbelief blurred together until I was pacing the room, phone in hand, half tempted to smash it against the wall. But I didn't. Instead, I saved the photos. Not to hold on to them, but to make sure I had evidence. I needed a plan. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. Instead, I sat in the silence of that empty house, replaying every moment of our life together, trying to figure out how I'd missed this. My mind spun like a storm, but one thought anchored me. If she was going to treat me like a fool, she'd regret it. When she walked through the door 2 hours later, laughing into the night air as if she didn't have a care in the world, I was ready. Ashley breezed through the door like nothing had happened. She carried herself with the smug confidence of someone who thought they'd outsmarted the world. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she tossed her bag onto the chair and flicked her hair over her shoulder. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice too light, too casual. "Why are you up so late?" I didn't answer right away. I was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, my laptop open on my lap. The photos I'd saved were pulled up on the screen, staring back at me like poison I couldn't spit out. She didn't notice at first. She was too busy towing off her shoes and unwrapping her scarf. "Rough night at work?" I finally asked, my tone colder than I intended. She froze for a split second, so brief it was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Then she turned to me with that practiced smile, the one she used to charm her way out of parking tickets and awkward family dinners. "Ugh, you have no idea," she groaned, flopping onto the couch like a bad actress in a soap opera. "Chris kept us in meetings all night. I swear, that man has no concept of time." It was like she was daring me to confront her. "Really? Meetings?" I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, and tilted the laptop screen just enough for her to see it. "Is that what you call this?" Her smile vanished. The color drained from her face as she stared at the photos. She didn't speak, didn't even blink. It was like someone had hit pause on her entire body. I could almost hear her brain scrambling to come up with a way out, a lie big enough to cover this disaster. "Ashley?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Do you want to explain why your meeting involved a hotel room and a bottle of champagne?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell the truth. But no, this was Ashley after all. "Are you seriously spying on me?" she snapped, her voice rising like she was the victim here. "How dare you invade my privacy? You know how stressful work has been. Chris and I were just blowing off some steam after a tough day. Nothing happened." I almost laughed. "Nothing happened?" I repeated, pointing at the screen. "Because it sure looks like something happened. And judging by the timestamp, it happened more than once." Her face twisted into something ugly. "Oh, so now you're a detective? God, you're so paranoid, Matt. Maybe if you spent less time sulking around the house and more time being a husband, I wouldn't have to." She stopped herself, but it was too late. "Wouldn't have to what?" I demanded, my voice rising now. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Cheat on me? Lie to my face? Do you even hear yourself, Ashley?" Her eyes darted to the door, like she was calculating whether she could make a dramatic exit. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "You've been lying to me for months," I said, taking a step closer. "Do you think I didn't notice? The late nights, the excuses, the sudden obsession with your appearance? I gave you the benefit of the doubt because I wanted to believe in you, Ashley. But you took that trust and—" I gestured to the laptop. "This is what you did with it." For the first time, her mask slipped. I saw it. The guilt, the shame, and the panic she couldn't quite hide. But then, like a switch flipping, she straightened her shoulders and crossed her arms. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said coolly. "It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is," I shot back. Her silence said more than words ever could. I didn't wait for her to come up with another excuse. I picked up her phone from the table, opened the message thread with Chris, and held it up for her to see. "Does he know about me?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Does he know you're married? Or is he just as blind to your lies as I was?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Pack your things, Ashley," I said, turning away from her. "You're leaving tonight." She didn't move. Instead, she stared at me like I just slapped her. "You're not serious," she scoffed. "This is my house too." "Not anymore," I said over my shoulder, already heading to the bedroom. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Ashley didn't pack her things that night. Instead, she launched into a full-blown performance, the kind of dramatic meltdown that could have won her an Emmy. She started by storming after me into the bedroom, shouting accusations and excuses in a chaotic mess of words. "You can't just kick me out," she screamed, her voice shrill. "I've given everything to this marriage, Matt. Everything." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. "Everything?" I spun around to face her, my voice reverberating off the walls. "You've given everything to Chris, not this marriage." She glared at me, her jaw clenched tight. For a moment, I thought she might lunge at me. Instead, she switched tactics. Tears welled up in her eyes, big, dramatic drops that rolled down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling now. "It wasn't like that. I was lonely, Matt. You've been so distant lately. I didn't know how else to." "Stop." My voice cut through her sob story like a knife. "Don't you dare try to make this about me. I've been here, Ashley. I've been here every single day, trying to build a life with you, while you've been out building something else with him." She flinched, but the tears didn't stop. "It didn't mean anything," she whispered, shaking her head. "I swear, it didn't mean anything." I walked past her to the closet and pulled out the suitcase she always used for business trips. "It meant enough for you to lie about it, to hide it, to throw away everything we've built." "Matt, please." "No, Ashley. I'm done." I grabbed an armful of her clothes and tossed them into the suitcase. She stood frozen in the doorway, watching as I systematically dismantled her place in my life. When I moved to her dresser, she finally snapped out of her stupor and rushed forward, grabbing my arm. "You're being ridiculous." she shouted, her voice breaking. You're going to throw away 15 years over a stupid mistake? I yanked my arm free, the fury boiling in me too hot to contain. No, you threw it away the moment you decided he was worth more than us. Her face twisted into something between anger and desperation. You think you're so perfect? She spat. Like you've never made a mistake? You want to play the victim here, fine. But don't pretend you're innocent. You stopped trying years ago, Matt. You let this happen. That hit me like a slap to the face. Not because it was true, but because it showed me exactly how far she was willing to go to avoid taking responsibility. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I grabbed the suitcase, zipped it up, and wheeled it out of the bedroom. Ashley followed close behind, alternating between begging and berating me. You're overreacting. People work through things like this all the time. Chris doesn't mean anything. I swear, it's done. You're such a coward, Matt. You think you can just run away from this. I ignored her. I marched straight to the front door, yanked it open, and dragged the suitcase outside. The chill of the night air hit me, but I barely felt it. Ashley stopped in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mix of rage and disbelief. What are you even going to do, huh? She sneered. Throw me out on the street? Good luck explaining that to our friends and family. Her smugness only fueled me. I won't have to, I said, pulling out my phone. You can explain it to them yourself when they see the pictures. Her eyes widened, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely scared. You wouldn't, she whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I dialed Chris's number, the one I'd found in her messages, and hit speaker. The color drained from her face as the call connected. Matt, stop, she hissed, lunging for the phone. I stepped back, keeping it just out of her reach. The line rang once, twice, and then I heard his voice. Chris here. Hey, Chris, I said, my voice icy. I think you should come pick up your new roommate. Silence. Then, a confused, what? Your girlfriend's suitcase is on my porch. She's all yours. Ashley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her hands clenched into fists, and for a second, I thought she might scream. But she didn't. She just stood there, her face crumbling as the weight of what was happening finally hit her. I ended the call without waiting for a response and turned back to Ashley. You've got 10 minutes to leave, I said, or I start making more calls. Her lip trembled, but I didn't care. This wasn't my Ashley anymore. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with. That Ashley was gone, replaced by a stranger who couldn't even own up to her betrayal. I shut the door behind her and locked it, leaving her outside with the suitcase, the cold night, and her mess of lies. I sat in the living room, the silence deafening after the storm Ashley had left behind. Her suitcase was still on the porch, but I wasn't about to check if she'd actually left. My mind raced with possibilities, each more satisfying than the last. Call her family? Post the photos online? No, that wasn't me. I didn't want revenge for its own sake. I wanted something deeper, something that would make her understand the cost of what she'd done. I needed to destroy the world she'd built on her lies. The first move was the house. Ashley had always bragged about how much she loved our home. She'd spent hours picking out furniture, curtains, and rugs, molding it into the perfect backdrop for her curated Instagram posts. To her, this house was her stage. To me, it was just a collection of walls and memories that now felt like a prison. I grabbed my laptop and logged into the real estate portal. Our house was in my name, a fact Ashley hadn't cared about when we bought it but now worked heavily in my favor. By morning, it was listed for sale, priced to move fast. The second move was the bank. Ashley wasn't much of a numbers person, so I'd always handled the finances. We had a joint account, but I'd been smart enough to keep my own separate savings. Within minutes, I drained the joint account into mine, leaving just enough for her to buy a bus ticket if Chris decided he wasn't up for playing house. The third move was her reputation. I didn't want to plaster her betrayal all over social media. I wasn't about to turn this into a public circus. But Chris? He didn't deserve to walk away clean. And more importantly, his wife didn't either. I dug through Ashley's phone, still sitting where she'd left it, and found her messages with Chris. They were vile, graphic descriptions of their nights together, photos, plans for secret getaways. I packaged the screenshots neatly into an email address to Rebecca F., Chris's wife. Her email wasn't hard to find. A quick search for Chris's company directory gave me all I needed. I attached the photos and typed a simple note. You deserve to know the truth. My wife and your husband have been seeing each other for months. I'm sorry you're finding out this way. I didn't hesitate before hitting send. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Not for Ashley or Chris, they deserved worse, but for Rebecca. She didn't ask for this any more than I did. But she deserved the truth even if it was brutal. By the time I finished, it was close to midnight. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the empty wine stain on the carpet like it was a crack in my life I could never scrub out. And then I heard it. A soft knock at the door. I froze. Ashley? Chris? Someone coming to demand an explanation for the chaos I'd just unleashed? I opened the door cautiously, half expecting Ashley to be standing there in tears, begging for another chance. Instead, it was Rebecca. She looked nothing like I'd imagined. No fancy jewelry, no designer clothes, just a tired woman in a hoodie, her hair pulled back and her eyes red like she'd been crying. She held up her phone, the screen glowing with the email I'd sent. "You're Matt?" she asked, her voice shaking. I nodded. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. She walked in slowly, her gaze darting around the room like she was trying to piece together the life I'd been living. "I just got your email," she said, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I had my suspicions, but this..." She trailed off, her voice cracking. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a stranger whose life you've just shattered? "I'm sorry," I managed. She let out a bitter laugh, wiping her eyes. "Don't be. You did what I should have done months ago." We sat in silence for a while, two strangers bound by the same betrayal. She told me how Chris had been acting distant for months, how he'd suddenly started working late and taking business trips. That didn't make sense. It was like hearing my own story, but from the other side. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," Rebecca admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell her that it would get better, that she'd figure it out, but the truth was, I didn't know if I believed that myself. Instead, I said, "You start by burning it all down." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" "You take everything they thought they could get away with and flip it on its head. You rebuild, but on your terms." For the first time, she smiled. A small, broken thing, but it was something. As Rebecca left, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about Ashley or Chris anymore. It was about reclaiming what they tried to take from me. My dignity, my strength, my future. And I wasn't going to stop until every last piece of their deceit was reduced to ashes. The next morning, the house felt like a war zone, eerily quiet but brimming with the aftershocks of the battle that had just unfolded. Ashley hadn't come back that night, or maybe she had, but if she did, she left without making a sound. Either way, I didn't care. Her chapter in this house was over. The first grenade went off at 9 a.m. sharp. I was sipping coffee, staring out the window at the autumn leaves spiraling to the ground, when my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. She hadn't called or texted since leaving the night before, but now her message was clear and direct. "He's losing his mind. I thought you should know." I smirked. "Good," I replied. "What's he saying?" The typing bubbles appeared almost immediately. Then, "He's claiming you're lying. Says Ashley's been spreading rumors and that you faked the pictures. I sent them to his boss and our lawyer. He's panicking." The mental image of Chris squirming in his sleek corporate office, trying to explain away the evidence, was almost too satisfying. His career was built on appearances, charm, and networking. A scandal like this? It would detonate everything he'd worked for. By noon, the fallout reached Ashley. She called me from a number I didn't recognize, probably borrowing someone's phone after realizing I'd blocked her on every platform. I didn't answer. She tried again, and again. On the fourth attempt, I picked up, but I didn't say a word. "Matt!" she barked, her voice sharp and frantic. "What the hell are you doing?" "Me?" I asked, keeping my tone cool. "I'm just cleaning up the mess you made." "You're out of your mind," she shrieked. "You sent those pictures to Chris's boss? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I think I've made things pretty clear," I said. "You don't get to destroy our marriage and then walk away like nothing happened." Actions have consequences, Ashley. Consequences? She scoffed. Do you think this is just about you and me? Chris's wife is threatening to sue him. He could lose everything. And you're so petty, you're willing to burn it all down just because you're hurt. Petty? I repeated, my voice hardening. You lied to me, cheated on me, disrespected everything we built. And now that your little fantasy is crumbling, I'm the petty one. She fell silent for a moment, and I could practically hear her scrambling for another angle. You're making this worse for yourself, Matt, she said finally, her tone dropping into something colder, more calculating. If you don't stop, I'll tell everyone you were abusive, that you pushed me into this. Who do you think they'll believe? A heartbroken wife or a bitter, vindictive husband? That struck a nerve, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I laughed. A short, sharp sound that made her pause. Go ahead, I said. Tell them whatever you want. I've got the receipts, Ashley. The texts, the pictures, the timelines. You want to play dirty? I've already won. Her breathing grew heavier, angrier, but she didn't respond. And just so we're clear, I added, the house is already listed. Your things are packed. The bank account is empty. You're officially free to live the life you wanted so badly with Chris. Enjoy. Before she could reply, I hung up. The final grenade landed that afternoon, when a moving truck pulled up to Chris's address. I'd spent the morning boxing up Ashley's remaining belongings, her designer bags, her expensive skincare products, even the ridiculous wine glasses she'd insisted we just had to have. I labeled the boxes with bright red markers. T.O. Chris, handle with care. Inside one of the boxes, I slipped a note, written in bold, black letters. Enjoy your new roommate. She's your problem now. The driver raised an eyebrow when I gave him the delivery address, but he didn't ask questions. I stood in the driveway, watching as the truck disappeared down the street, feeling a strange sense of closure. By the evening, my phone lit up with another message from Rebecca. Chris is out. HR got the pictures. He's been placed on indefinite leave. He tried to blame Ashley, but no one's buying it. Thought you'd want to know. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. The house was quiet now. Not the heavy, oppressive silence from the night before, but something lighter, cleaner. I'd burned it all down, but somehow it didn't feel like destruction. It felt like freedom. By the next morning, the house felt different. The emptiness wasn't haunting anymore. It was liberating. Every trace of Ashley was gone, packed away in those boxes and sent to Chris's doorstep. The echoes of her voice, her perfume lingering in the air, even the shadow of her betrayal. They'd all started to fade. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't over, not completely. The memories, the anger, and the sense of loss would linger like bruises that refused to heal. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. I poured myself a coffee and opened my laptop, ready to sort through the chaos. Emails flooded my inbox, some from Rebecca, others from lawyers I'd contacted about finalizing the divorce. The house listing had already attracted attention, with 2 offers coming in overnight. Good. The faster I could sell, the faster I could leave this chapter behind. As I sorted through the offers, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca again. They're imploding. Couldn't help but smirk. I texted back, what happened now? Her reply came with a photo attached. Ashley and Chris standing outside his house, mid-argument. Her arms were flailing, her face twisted in fury, while Chris stood stiff, his jaw set like a man pushed to the brink. She's blaming him for everything, Rebecca wrote. I guess she thought he'd let her move in. He didn't. Threw her out last night. I laughed. A genuine, belly-deep laugh that caught me off guard. For all the destruction they'd caused, their little affair hadn't just burned my life. It had turned theirs to ash as well. Rebecca sent another text. You okay? I paused before replying. Was I okay? It was hard to say. I wasn't crushed anymore, wasn't consumed by rage or despair. What I felt now was clarity. Getting there, I wrote back. Her reply came quickly. Same. Coffee soon. Caught me off guard. Coffee? With Rebecca? I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. But why not? She understood what I was going through better than anyone else. Maybe we both needed someone who got it, someone who wasn't part of the chaos but had survived it. Sure, I typed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tasks. I contacted the lawyer to speed up the divorce proceedings, finalized the sale of the house, and started looking at apartments in a city 3 hours away. A fresh start in a place where Ashley's shadow couldn't follow me. By the evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. For so long, my life had been dictated by Ashley's choices, her lies, her betrayal. But now I was calling the shots. As I stood in the empty living room, looking out at the last rays of sunlight painting the sky, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. Not for Ashley, she didn't deserve that, but for the wake-up call. Her betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also forced me to rebuild, to strip away everything that was false and start fresh, on my own terms. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings, I left one thing behind. The framed wedding photo of us that had hung in the hallway for years. I placed it on the kitchen counter, face down, and walked out of the house for the last time. Let her keep it, I thought, a reminder of what she threw away. The first thing I noticed about my new apartment was the quiet, not the oppressive silence of my old house, where every creak felt like a ghost of Ashley's betrayal, but a peaceful stillness that felt earned. It was a modest place, a one-bedroom with scuffed hardwood floors, and a balcony overlooking the bustling city streets below. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Moving day was uneventful, which was a blessing. A friend from work had lent me his truck, and I'd spent most of the morning hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was a mess of half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt free. I stood on the balcony with a beer in hand, watching the city move on without me. People walked dogs, carried groceries, and chased kids down the sidewalks, completely unaware of the chaos I'd left behind. It was humbling in a way, realizing how small my problems were in the grand scheme of things. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m.? I know a great place near you. I stared at the message longer than I probably should have. Since the divorce papers were filed and the house sale finalized, she and I had texted a few times, mostly updates about Chris's continued downward spiral. But this was different. Sure. Send me the address, I replied. The next morning, I found myself sitting in a cozy cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The smell of fresh pastries and brewing coffee filled the air, and soft jazz played in the background. Rebecca arrived a few minutes later, looking more composed than I'd seen her before. Gone was the red-eyed, broken woman who had shown up at my door. Today she seemed steady. We ordered coffee and settled into a corner booth. For a while we just talked about work, the absurdity of navigating lawyers, and the strange, bittersweet freedom that came with starting over. Chris moved back in with his parents, Rebecca said, stirring her coffee with a small smirk. Guess Ashley's charm wasn't enough to get him to stick around after HR canned him. I chuckled. Good. He deserves to feel as small as he made us feel. Her smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something softer. Do you feel lighter, now that it's all out in the open? I thought about her question, taking a sip of my coffee to buy time. Lighter, yeah, I admitted, but also untethered. Like I've got all this space now, and I'm not sure what to fill it with. She nodded. I get that. It's like losing something you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. You're glad it's gone, but you don't know who you are without it. Her words hit harder than I expected. For so long, my identity had been tied to being Ashley's husband. Now, without her, I wasn't sure where I stood. So, what do we do with all this space? I asked, half joking but also genuinely curious. Rebecca smiled, a quiet, thoughtful expression that felt like the first bloom of spring. We build something better, she said simply. Our conversation stretched on for hours, drifting from the heavy topics of betrayal and loss to lighter things. Books, travel dreams, even the ridiculous quirks of our pets. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed without bitterness, without that nagging weight in my chest. When we finally left the cafe, the sun was high in the sky, and the chill of autumn felt less biting. We stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, neither of us sure how to end the morning. Thanks for this, I said, slipping my hands into my pockets. It's been a while since I've felt Normal. Rebecca tilted her head, studying me for a moment. You're not normal, Matt, and that's a good thing. Normal is boring. I laughed, shaking my head. Fair enough. As we parted ways, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. Maybe it was the city, the new apartment, or just the simple fact that I'd finally stopped letting Ashley take up space in my head. Whatever it was, it felt good. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward. The weeks after meeting Rebecca for coffee felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I'd thought rebuilding my life would be a slow, painful process, but something had shifted. The anger that used to wake me up in the middle of the night was gone. The bitterness that sat heavy in my chest like a stone had eased. Each day started to feel lighter, like I was peeling off layers of an old, suffocating identity. My mornings were my own now, not filled with Ashley's sharp demands or the endless juggling of schedules that revolved around her life. For the first time in years, I had space. Real, quiet, uninterrupted space to figure out who I was without her. One evening, as I unpacked the last of my boxes, my phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca. We should do something crazy. Bucket list crazy. What's on yours? I chuckled at the thought. When was the last time I'd even considered something like a bucket list? Ashley and I had talked about traveling someday, but those plans always felt like distant, empty promises. Something we'd say to sound adventurous at dinner parties but never really meant. Skydiving? I texted back, half joking. Her response came instantly. You're on. This weekend. I stared at the screen, blinking in disbelief. She couldn't be serious. Could she? You're joking, right? I replied, but she wasn't. 2 days later, we were standing at a tiny airfield on the edge of the city, strapped into jumpsuits and watching a cheerful instructor give us a crash course on how to fall out of the sky without dying. Rebecca looked entirely too calm, her grin infectious as she nudged me with her elbow. Nervous? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Terrified? I admitted, my palms already sweating. Good, she said with a laugh. It means you're alive. The plane ride up was surreal. As the ground shrank below us, my heart raced in ways I hadn't felt in years. Not from fear or anger, but from adrenaline, excitement, the sheer thrill of stepping out of my comfort zone. When it was time to jump, I didn't hesitate. The rush of freefall was indescribable, a mix of terror and exhilaration that made everything else in my life seem impossibly small. By the time the parachute deployed and I floated gently back to Earth, I felt lighter, not just physically but emotionally, like I'd left the last remnants of my old life somewhere up in the clouds. Rebecca landed shortly after, her laughter ringing out as she stumbled to her feet. That, she said, breathless and grinning, was the craziest thing I've ever done. Same, I said, grinning back. We spent the rest of the day celebrating with burgers and beer at a dive bar near the airfield. For hours we talked and laughed like old friends, the weight of our shared pasts nowhere in sight. It wasn't until we were walking back to our cars that Rebecca stopped, her expression turning serious for the first time all day. Can I ask you something? She said, her voice soft. Of course. Do you think you'll ever trust someone again? I mean, really trust them? The question caught me off guard. I looked at her, at the way her eyes held both hope and fear, and realized she wasn't just asking about me. She was asking about herself, too. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think maybe trust isn't about forgetting what happened. Maybe it's about finding someone who doesn't make you feel like you have to forget. She nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. That's a good answer. As we parted ways, I felt something shift again. The road ahead didn't feel as uncertain anymore. It wasn't about erasing the pain of the past. It was about building something better, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to take those steps a month after the skydive. Life had taken on a rhythm I didn't recognize but welcomed. The weight of everything, Ashley, the betrayal, the firestorm I'd ignited, was no longer something I carried every day. The scars were still there, but they didn't ache like they used to. Rebecca and I stayed in touch, meeting up every week or so for coffee, hikes, or impulsive adventures she'd text me about at odd hours. She had this way of making life feel unpredictable but in the best way, like each day held something worth chasing. One Friday afternoon, She sent me a message that caught me off guard. Pack a bag. Weekend road trip. I'll pick you up in an hour. I stared at the text, laughing despite myself. My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't exactly the spontaneous type. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd survived. If I could handle my wife's betrayal and rebuilding my life from scratch, surely I could handle a weekend trip with Rebecca. Where are we going? I asked. Her reply came almost immediately. You'll see. True to her word, she showed up an hour later in an old Jeep that looked like it had seen better days but somehow fit her perfectly. She was grinning as I climbed into the passenger seat, a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. No hints? I asked as we pulled onto the highway. None, she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. The drive was long, but it didn't feel that way. We talked about everything and nothing. Our childhood's favorite movies, the dumbest things we'd ever done. The miles blurred together, and by the time we reached our destination, the sun had set, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and pink. Rebecca pulled into a small bed and breakfast tucked into the hills. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine, and the sound of a nearby stream filled the quiet. Ever been to a vineyard? She asked, grinning as she stepped out of the Jeep. I shook my head, laughing. You drove me 4 hours for wine? Not just wine, she said, winking. The best wine. The next day was a haze of laughter, wine tastings, and exploring the sprawling vineyards. It felt surreal, like a vacation I hadn't planned for but desperately needed. At one point, we ended up sitting on a hill overlooking the rows of grapevines, the horizon stretching endlessly before us. This is what it's supposed to feel like, Rebecca said, breaking the comfortable silence. What is? I asked. Life, she said simply, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Not perfect, not easy, but full. Like you're actually living it instead of just surviving it. Her words hit harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been in survival mode, just trying to get through each day. But here, sitting under the open sky with someone who understood what it meant to lose and rebuild, I realized she was right. That evening, we sat by a fire pit at the bed and breakfast, the warmth of the flames warding off the chill in the air. Rebecca turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever think about what's next? She asked. All the time, I admitted. But for the first time, I don't feel like I have to figure it all out at once. I'm okay with not knowing. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. That's a good place to be. The trip ended too quickly, but the feeling it left behind lingered. When I returned to the city, I started making small changes. Things I'd been putting off for years. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I went to concerts alone, explored new restaurants, and even started jogging in the mornings, a habit I hadn't had since college. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. As for Rebecca, she became a constant in my life, though neither of us pushed for more than friendship. It wasn't about rushing into something new. It was about healing, about learning to trust ourselves again before trusting anyone else. One evening, as we sat on my tiny balcony, sharing takeout and watching the city lights, she said something that stayed with me. You know, Matt, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. I laughed, shaking my head. You've got it backward. You're the brave one, dragging me out of my cave and forcing me to live again. Maybe we're both brave, she said, smiling softly. For the first time, I believed it. The city had a strange way of softening its edges in the winter. The sharp bustle of daily life slowed, muted under the crisp air and the soft glow of holiday lights. It was my first winter alone in years, but it didn't feel lonely. My apartment, once a chaotic mess of boxes in transition, now felt like home. A real home, built on my terms. Rebecca and I still saw each other regularly, though something had shifted between us in the weeks following our vineyard trip. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. It was something deeper, something unspoken but strong, like a thread tying us together through the chaos we'd survived. One night, just before Christmas, she invited me to a dinner party at her place. It's small, she assured me over the phone. Just a few people, nothing fancy. I hesitated at first. Social gatherings weren't exactly my thing anymore. But Rebecca had a way of convincing me to step outside my comfort zone. When I arrived, her apartment was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of baked goods and the hum of quiet conversation. She greeted me at the door, her smile bright and genuine. "You made it," she said, hugging me lightly. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, handing her a bottle of wine I'd picked up on the way. The evening was unexpectedly pleasant. Her friends were kind, easygoing, and thankfully avoided the kind of probing questions I dreaded. For once, I felt like a normal person again. Not the guy whose wife had cheated, not the man who'd set his entire life on fire, but just Matt. As the night wound down, the guests filtered out one by one until it was just Rebecca and me, sitting on her couch with mugs of tea in hand. The room was quiet, save for the faint crackle of the fireplace. "I needed this," I admitted, breaking the silence. "Me too," she said, her voice soft. We sat there for a while, not saying much, just existing in the moment. It was comforting, the kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Eventually, she turned to me, her expression serious. "Do you ever think about what it all meant? Everything we went through?" I nodded slowly. "All the time. First, I thought it was just pain, something to get through. But now, I think it was a wake-up call, a chance to rebuild, even if it wasn't the way I wanted it to happen." Her gaze softened. "Do you think you're there yet? Rebuilt?" "Not completely," I admitted. "But I'm getting closer." She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "Me too." That night, as I walked back to my apartment under the glow of the city lights, I felt something shift inside me. Closure wasn't about forgetting or erasing what had happened. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building the life I wanted. Not the one I'd been clinging to, but the one I truly deserved. I took on new projects at work, started volunteering at a local animal shelter, and even planned a solo trip to the mountains, something I dreamed of doing for years. Rebecca and I remained close, but we let things unfold naturally, without pressure or expectation. Whatever we were becoming, it was built on honesty, trust, and a shared understanding of what it meant to start over. One evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the city below, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter, or broken, or lost. I was just me, and that was enough. Epilogue. Looking back, I've learned that betrayal doesn't define you, how you respond to it does. Losing Ashley was painful, but in a strange way, it was also freeing. It forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd been neglecting and gave me the chance to rebuild from the ground up. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone facing the same kind of betrayal, it would be this: don't be afraid to burn it all down. Sometimes the ashes are where you find the clearest path forward. As for the future, I don't know exactly where it's headed, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the unknown. I'm ready.